Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is our first forum on wireless technology. We're going to try to find out how to have faster, safer, more secure, and reliable options for health and the environment. My name is Lori Woden. I'm the co-administrator for Sustainable Upton. And we are very grateful to United Parish Church for letting us use this wonderful space for this event and the next forum that's going to be on April 28th. Details first, the bathrooms are right through that door to the left. You probably saw a wonderful Soul Fuel Cafe that they've so generously opened for this event, where you can get our own brew of Red Barn coffee or organic teas, lots of other kinds of drinks, raspberry iced tea, brownies made just today. There's even pizza that you can take home or you can have here. So if you get hungry and you want to go get a little piece of pizza, that's okay. You can bring it down. And I want to thank all the people that helped with supporting this all for the last few years and helping set up today as well. We're being recorded by Paul Norton for the town, so be careful of the wires and the cameras. And we are thankful that this program is going to run on our cable station, which I think you told me was 196. Is that right, Paul?
192.
192. Thank you. Our featured speaker, CC Doucette, is being interviewed for Jan Lewis's cable show, so those unable to be here will be able to see that as well as this presentation today. I'd like to ask you at this time to turn off your cell phones if you would. We don't want to have any interruptions. And is this loud enough? Can you all hear? Okay, great. We have a special program tonight. I'm grateful and commend you all for coming here today because curiosity is what you need to learn all about this, and it's very vital in this day and age where there is a lot that we may not always be told. On the town meeting warrant, there's a citizens petition to put a pause on any new wireless installations until the FCC does what the courts have mandated it to do. Actually study all the peer-reviewed independent studies and read the 11,000 pages of submitted testimony which shows harm from wireless to people, pollinators, and the environment. They were sued in 2021 and lost the court case, and this is what they're supposed to do. Nothing has happened, nothing has been done, and yet the rollout continues, so that's a problem. We plan to amend the article for areas in town where there is little or no cell service, like East Street and North Avenue. This is just a pause so we can be sure it's safe for us and our families and not be used as guinea pigs, and that none of this radiation levels that were established in 1996 without safety testing at the time have been safety tested since by the government or telecom. First, we're going to hear from the former president of Microsoft Canada, who after doing a lot of research became concerned about the harms being caused to people and the planet and proposes possible solutions in a short video.
My name is Frank Clegg. I'm the CEO of Canadians for Safe Technology, a 100% volunteer-based organization of citizens, parents, and scientists focused on raising awareness of the harmful effects from wireless technology. We provide information on how to use wireless devices more safely and work with all levels of government to provide a healthier environment. I've spent over 40 years in the technology industry. My most recent position was president of Microsoft Canada, and I've seen the tremendous benefit technology can provide. I've also seen the potential harm if technology is not used correctly. In my opinion, our current implementation of wireless technology is not safe, and I'm especially concerned with our plans for 5G. I don't make this statement lightly. I've met with experts from institutions such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and the University of Toronto, and I've met with an expert advisor to the World Health Organization and one of the lead scientific writers for Al Gore's team that won the Nobel Prize. Over 250 scientists from 40 countries signed a formal appeal to the World Health Organization and the United Nations member states expressing their concern over the harmful effects of wireless technology, and added an additional appeal for the effects of 5G, especially the effects on children. Hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published demonstrating harm to humans and the environment. This evidence includes increase in cancer, sperm damage, reproductive harms, memory and learning deficits, especially in children, and damage to our DNA, nervous systems, and the cells in our bodies. Unfortunately, Health Canada and the FCC are stuck in the 1920 science that states tissue must be heated to be harmed. The last update from Health Canada of our safety guidelines was deeply flawed. 5G has all the issues associated with 2, 3, and 4G, plus some additional concerns. Because of the technology limits, 5G will require significantly more antennas, and they will be significantly closer to our homes, schools, and places of work. We have one instance where a small cell antenna has been installed 20 meters from a child's bedroom. Any lamppost, telephone post, or hydro pole is a candidate for a potential 5G small cell antenna. In addition, 5G technology uses millimeter waves for the first time. These frequencies are similar to those used by the US and Israeli military in crowd control systems. Now, scientists hired by my industry state that the power is significantly higher in these active denial systems. That may be true, but I'm not sure it's relevant. We have no clue of the potential harm from exposing people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to millimeter waves. In fact, there has been no testing to prove and ensure us that 5G technology is safe to humans and to our environment. That is why we're calling for Health Canada to do a comprehensive review of the science-based evidence. This review should be based on the international standards used to evaluate and analyze scientific research. It should consist of an independent panel that has the appropriate resources. This type of review has never been conducted by Health Canada. There is a better alternative. Fiber optic and wired connections are up to 100 times faster, do not emit radiation, therefore they're safer, they're more reliable, they're more resilient, and they're more protective of our security and privacy. The IEEE has stated that wireless technology will continue to consume 10 times more energy than their wired counterparts. Our federal governments gain billions of dollars in revenue in spectrum auctions and ongoing licensing fees. But there has never been a complete analysis of the total costs from wireless technology. That's why we're calling for a total economic analysis of the potential revenue versus the economic burden from wireless technology. These costs should consist of, but not be limited to, increase in healthcare costs, the cost of lost productivity due to health effects, and the cost in breaches of privacy and security, as well as the cost in the harm to our environment. Some applications need a wireless connection, but the majority can use a wired connection that is safer, faster, and in some cases cheaper. That is why we're calling for a shift in mindset to wired and fiber connections first, wherever and whenever possible. My industry is installing the infrastructure for 5G at a very rapid rate, even though there are few, if any, devices that can take advantage of 5G technology today. That is why we feel it is responsible and necessary to call for a moratorium on 5G spectrum auctions, as well as a moratorium on the installation of new small cell antennas until Health Canada has completed its proper review of the scientific evidence and the full economic analysis has been completed. Estimates are there will be an additional $11 trillion in revenue from 5G technology. We also know it is very difficult for government regulation to keep pace with the rapid change in innovation and technology. That is why we're calling for a shift in the responsibility and accountability so that my industry take responsibility to prove that technology is safe before it is released to the market. We have a model for chemicals that we can build on. This is similar to the accountability and responsibility that we expect from the automobile industry and from the pharmaceutical industry. Today it is possible to install a small cell antenna 20 meters from a child's bedroom without any notification to the neighborhood and without any consent from the local municipality, town, or city. That is why we're calling for a change in legislation that
Peter,
Yeah.
put the lights back on.
What's that?
There's lights here, thanks. There you go. So that gives you, what he's calling for is where we already are in America. So we're at the stage where we've already asked them to check for more safety. They were sued. They updated the standards by keeping the old standards and got sued again, and have been asked by the DC court, mandated really now, to update their standards using the actual science and testimony. So that's where we are in America. So now, for the best part of our program, we have a special program today. I am delighted to welcome Cece Doucette here. She has spoken all over the world about this topic. She is the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology and Wireless Education. She spent 8 years fundraising to bring wireless technology into the Ashland public school system. Then she learned it was harmful, investigated the non-industry science, and helped her children's schools become the first in the nation to take precautionary measures up with wireless technology. She also helped her public library become the first in the nation to loan a radiation detection meter and to host a documentary, film, and discussion series on electromagnetic radiation and health. She established Massachusetts for Safe Technology to bring citizens together on this vital issue and works with schools, communities, municipalities, and legislatures to address wireless radiation and public health. As I said, she's also the Education Services Director with the international nonprofit Wireless Education, which offers affordable 30-minute online training for schools and families. Cece was honored to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institutes of Health and to present state and local policy at the International EMF Medical Conference. She's been featured on Boston 25 News, PBS, CHD-TV, Spirit of Change, EMF Warriors, and is in the film Generation Zap, which we'll see a little bit of later on, and Wi-Fi Refugees. May I please introduce Cece Doucette.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you again to the parish here and to everybody who's been helping Lori to build this awareness out in your community. And this is really how it's done. When I first fell down the rabbit hole on this issue, like most of you, I had no idea there was anything to even think about with wireless because, of course, it's so convenient and it's on the market, so why would we need to question it, right? Then one night at book group, my girlfriend Wendy, who's an electrical engineer, she and all 4 of her children have chronic Lyme disease. So Wendy was trying to figure out what all the environmental exposures are that could play into weakening the body to the point where you get so sick that you may not really recover well. And she was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. So at book group, Wendy says, you guys, I think there's something up with Wi-Fi. And it was book group, so I just kind of made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, something crossed my desk that inferred the same thing, and I went, uh-oh. Because if there's anything to this, I would like to know, because I literally spent 8 years running our local education foundation and bringing all the wireless infrastructure in, the iPads, the Chromebooks, the smart boards, the minis, and all this equipment we were being told was going to be important for our children to succeed in the world. So it was not an easy conversation to have with our towns. I didn't know it at the time, but the industry had already gotten in at the state level and had embedded this technology into our curriculum. So if our schools don't comply, it could affect their funding. So we would bring this up with our school committee and say, I think we have a problem here. And when I first started sharing information to our school committee, I thought we would take care of it as if we had a gas leak in our science labs or something, right? We're harming the children, we're harming the staff. And I got back, well, radio silence. And I think it was when they read the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices. And thank you to everybody who was so gracious to put your phones in airplane mode or turn them off for this presentation. But can I see a show of hands if anybody has an iPhone with you right now? Okay. I invite you to take your iPhone out and go into settings. It doesn't mean you have to, take it into active mode, but I want to show you what's been in there all along that none of us probably ever realized. So from settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. And then once you're in general, go all the way down to the bottom and you'll see legal and regulatory. Okay, so settings, general, legal and regulatory, hit that, and then you'll see a little menu at the top, and about 4 down you'll see RF exposure, which is radio frequency, two-way microwave radiation that they politely call energy in this fine print disclaimer. And when we read through that, they're telling us that they tested these devices at a distance from the body. And if you exceed that distance, you're going to exceed the FCC's, Federal Communication Commission's, public radiation exposure limits, which, as Lori indicated, were never biologically safety tested. So in a subsequent paragraph, they suggest that if you want to take some action on this, use a hands-free option, like a speakerphone or a headset. And one of the properties of microwave radiation or radio frequency is that it amplifies with metal. So if you take a traditional headset and you plug it into your radiating device, you're creating a pathway right up to your brain for that radiation, right? Probably not our best option. Those earbuds are putting a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain that are then communicating with some device, your tablet or your phone or whatever. And it's a really unhealthy environment. So our message today is not no technology, it's safe technology. And there are so many amazing people working on this. We have solutions for everything. For example, if you do have to make a phone call, you might consider looking for an option called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. Notice there's no metal, just rubber tips. The acoustics come through a rubber hose. And these little ferrite beads break the radiation before it can travel up to your brain. And it's got good acoustics and stuff, so you would use this and then put your device as far away as you can. Our Centers for Disease Control and Protection, as we know, have long since recognized that one type of radiation is called ionizing radiation, which is where it can break the atom and cause all sorts of harm. That would be the sun, that could be gamma rays, it could be X-rays, and that's why we wear a lead apron when we do X-rays. The type of radiation that we're talking about is called non-ionizing radiation. It doesn't break the atom. And for years, the industry and the federal government has tried to tell us that if you don't have heat enough to break that atom, then everything's fine. But that's not what the peer-reviewed, independent scientific studies are telling us. So I started looking at the science because, again, I brought this technology into my children's schools. And so morally, I felt obligated, as hopefully when you leave today, we all will, to protect not only ourselves, but our children and our environment. So there was a compendium done by 14 leading microwave science experts around the world, and they put it into a report called the Bioinitiative Report. This is just the cover, and then I have the table of contents that I'll read to you from. And if you were to print out the whole thing, it's 1,600 pages of summaries of hundreds upon hundreds of scientific studies. And this poster here, for example, they've done color charts to show at what level of exposure do you get the types of illnesses that I'm going to share with you now. So the summary of key scientific evidence. Evidence to damage to sperm and reproduction. And when I started reading the sperm studies, I learned that they've taken male human sperm exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. It changed the DNA, which is our roadmap to grow a proper anything from a child to a plant to every biome that's out there. Damaged the DNA, slowed the motility of the sperm, and caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of radiation exposure. And I went, you gotta be kidding me. My oldest daughter had just gone out to St. Mike's with her MacBook, and for Christmas we had given my youngest daughter, as she headed into high school, her own laptop too. And where were both of my girls using it, but right on top of their reproductive organs. And so I fell down the rabbit hole in about 2013, and subsequent to that, Kaiser Permanente and others have come up with additional fertility studies that show the impact on women, so it's not just the men. It's every biological reproductive system out there. Evidence that children are more vulnerable. They are not just little people. Their DNA is still under construction. Their immune system, their central nervous system, they're still in the works. And this damages DNA, and it makes us wonder why 50% of today's children have a chronic illness. Evidence for fetal and neonatal effects. So we know that when we're growing a fetus, the rapid cell development happens hour after hour after hour, and this can detrimentally impact that. Evidence for effects on autism. So Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab here at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she sees huge connections between what we know scientifically happens with exposure to microwave radiation and what she sees in families in her care. And it's not to say it's all because of this. There's so many environmental toxins that we're up against today that this is a leading player in this. Evidence for effects on the blood-brain barrier. So we are built with membranes to protect certain sensitive areas in our biology. One of them is a blood-brain barrier that keeps toxins from going in. And what Dr. Palpatcher and other colleagues have learned is that when we expose ourselves to microwave radiation, and this is how the radiation works, the Earth has its own electromagnetic field. It's measured in hertz. That's how many times a second does the Earth pulse these beautiful electrons that come up and help to regulate our own cycles. There's a gentleman named Schumann who figured it out. The Earth pulses at 7.83 hertz, or times per second. And here today, with our man-made frequencies, we have kilohertz that go 1,000 times per second, spiked erratic pulses of microwave radiation. And now most of our technology that you and I use is in the megahertz range, which is 1 million spiked erratic pulses of microwave radiation per second. And in the gigahertz range, it's 1 billion times per second. So we are overpowered by man-made electromagnetic fields of radio frequency microwave radiation. And what Dr. Patcher and other scientists discovered is that when we continue to bombard our brains or our guts or our hearts or our lungs, all of these electrical organs that we have, it can cause a permeation of the blood-brain barrier, which means it's opening up the blood-brain barrier. So before, where we would be escorting toxins out of our body through the bloodstream, now they can take a turn and go into the brain. So when we look around and we ask ourselves, why in the last 20 or so years have we started having these significant increases in autism, ADD, ADHD, PANS, PANDAS, earlier and earlier onset Alzheimer's? If we pollute the brain, we can expect a whole host of neurological malfunctions. Genotoxicity, as we discussed with the DNA, neurotoxicity, cancers. So there has been evidence of cancers for more than a decade, so much so that back in 2011, the World Health Organization classified this radiofrequency radiation as a possible human carcinogen, group 2B, which is the same category as lead, thalidomide, chloroform, and a whole host of other toxins that I can't even pronounce the chemical names for them. What was missing at the time in 2011 when they did that were the animal studies. Since then, our own government has completed a $30 million study over 2 decades, and that was done by the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. And they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health. And at the end of their review, with experts from all over the world weighing in, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they could assign. And one would think that if this is saying clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, that the organization that sponsored that study would translate it into public policy. That organization was the Food and Drug Administration 20 years ago. Different people running it now. Today, it's run by, the radiation area is run by Dr. Jeffrey Sheeran, and he at the end of the day said, oh, well, we don't really believe what that review said. And the industry will take a good study and spin it and say, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one to corroborate that this is actually true. Well, right on the heels of our cell phone study that showed clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study on cell tower emissions. So you have to have the two, right, connecting to one another. And their study corroborated everything we found at the National Institutes of Health, which is the gold standard on toxics research across the world. So we don't need more science. What we do need is good public policy. So there's one other critically important finding that, you can go look at the Bioinitiative report. If you go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and you look at our resources page, you can just drill down into whatever you want to know a little bit more about. Electrohypersensitivity, or electromagnetic illnesses, microwave sickness is what it was first called, because this was developed by our militaries back in World War II for radar systems, right? And then they brought it to market with no biological safety testing. So what the science is telling us is that our Federal Communications Commission set microwave radiation limit guidelines back in 1996 through the Telecommunications Act, saying you have to have this much heat to have harm. Well, what that whole body of science is telling us is it has nothing to do with heat. Granted, you don't want to cook yourself, but the science is showing biological effects at hundreds of thousands of times below what the FCC is still allowing industry to expose us at. So as Lori indicated, when Dr. Jeffrey Sheeran in 2019 went over to the FCC and said, oh, we don't need to change those limits, keep doing what you're doing, one first might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Sheeran to make a statement like that? Well, you can take a look, and you don't have to look very far to discover that his wife is a partner in a law firm that represents these big industries. So he should have never been anywhere near that study. He has a very clear conflict of interest, but for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to matter too much these days. And so when the FCC closed a docket that had been open for 6 years, into which all this science was filed, medical reports, citizens who become ill or lost loved ones because they got maybe the glioblastoma brain tumors or the acoustic neuromas, or far too many people are getting sick and simply don't know to connect the dots to their exposures from perhaps even their own devices. So when this determination by the FCC was that they didn't have to change their really outdated and never correct public radiation exposure limits, then the lawsuits began. So Dr. Deborah Davis was on the climate change team that won the Nobel Peace Prize. She has put out this book called Disconnect, and it talks about the science and why we don't know and what we should do about that. She and her team, along with her executive director, Theodora Scarato, have established the Environmental Health Trust, and they are all over this issue, along with other environmental exposures that we need to do better with. So there are incredible resources for anybody who wants to do the deep dive and learn more. So, what are common microwave symptoms that maybe you or perhaps some of your loved ones experience but would never think to say, gee, what happens if I turn off the wireless? Time and again after we give one of these talks, people come back to me and say, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I want to hear it. Welcome to the club. But once we know, first we can't unknow it, and once you know, you're halfway there. And then many people will decide that they're going to take a chance and see if anything improves. So impacts on the brain, stabbing, searing headaches that your doctors can't figure it out. Insomnia is a huge one. I know with my mom, for example, when she was 92, I went over to her little apartment, and in her bedroom, she had the wireless router, she had the base station for her cordless phone, and somewhere kicking around was her cell phone. And I went through and I showed her what her exposures were, and a couple weeks later I talked to her again, and she said, oh my gosh, that night you left, I slept for 10 hours. And I said, what do you normally do? And she says, I don't. It takes me forever to fall asleep. I wake up throughout the night, and by the time morning comes, I'm so loopy, I have to perch myself on the edge of my bed before I trust myself to get up and get moving. I said, and now what? And she said, ever since you turned that stuff off, I've been sleeping every night. And it can be that life-changing, just by learning a little bit and having a little courage to perhaps change your mindset. Dizziness, difficulty concentrating, brain fog, memory issues, chronic fatigue. I was in touch with Dr. Andrew Goldsworthy over in the UK, and he explained it quite simply, that our biological cells only have so much energy. And that energy is really well calibrated to get us through our everyday tasks, cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. But if we have this constant bombardment of this man-made energy, our bodies ultimately go, what the heck? And can't do everything they need to do because they're fighting off all this man-made exposure. Ringing in the ears, humming, some people feel sharp pains in their ears, and ultimately some become very sensitive to all the noises in their environment. Skin, rashes, heatings. A lot of people talk about the hot ear when they put the cell phone up to their ear. My tell is my pinky finger starts to tingle if I'm holding an active device. And now we know scientifically why. So these are electromagnetic fields. And our red blood cells are meant to free float and go and bring oxygen to all of our vital organs. And what the science shows is it's causing something like that they call the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, I used to love those candies, Rolos, when I was little, the stacked up caramels. But it's not so good when our blood cells start stacking up. They're magnetizing because of this man-made energy. And then they can't free float and get to where they need to go to bring oxygen. And if you speak to your doctors about chronic illnesses, the root cause of many, if not most, is oxidative stress. We're not getting enough oxygen to keep our organs and our vital systems going properly. But our skin has little antennas in the surface of our skin. And when we have this other energy jacking those, that's why some people start getting rashes. There's a gentleman in Framingham who designed our logo for us. He's a graphic artist. And Chuck had something going on. His leg was going jiggity, the nerves in his leg. And his doctors couldn't figure it out, specialists couldn't figure it out. So Chuck starts doing his research and he goes, well, shoot, that's where I carry my cell phone. Removes the cell phone, the leg gets better, right? So it can be that simple if we simply know to remove the exposures. Mood, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression before the pandemic, right? Literally, statistically, epidemic proportions, and among our children. Suicidal ideation in our schools like we have never seen before. How long can we radiate our kids before something is going to go wrong? Eyes, pressure, twitching, poor vision, cataracts, and then our hearts, another one of our lovely electrical organs. Depending on your individual proclivity, maybe it may start beating too fast or too slow, right? Arrhythmia, chest pain. I've heard people describe it sometimes like it feels like somebody's sitting on their chest because their poor little heart can't keep up with all these pulsations of microwave radiation. And then, it can cause adrenal problems, digestive, tingling, dehydration, hair loss, feeling like you've got the flu, but it never really turns out to be anything. So now that we know over the devices that you and I have control, we can choose to take some baby steps and start just, you don't have to go home and change everything. Just start noticing, right? And then, I know Lori has a radio frequency detection meter. As she mentioned, I went after a grant in Ashland and got one put on loan that measures this invisible toxin, right? And it's really helpful because then you can just walk around and say, oh, I got my TV. My husband just bought a new stove. Oh my gosh, that new stove. It has a smart feature on it, right? And with the Internet of Things and 5G, they want to connect everything that you buy to harvest your data as a revenue stream to sell to others who would be interested in selling you product. So here in this room, it's actually not bad. Well, it's not great because there's probably a wireless access point somewhere, and perhaps some of you still have a wearable on or a laptop, or there might be antennas in here. Right now we're at 1,130, and the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically in like 3 feet of air, how much of this man-made radio frequency is there? So the science indoors wants us to be at 10 or less. I know some people who are electromagnetically sensitive, and they, for certain frequencies, can do okay at 100 or less, but the science recommends being at 10 or less. So I want to give you a demonstration of what happens when I take my phone out of airplane mode and the antennas start going. I'm not even doing anything. Your devices have multiple antennas. There's cellular, data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better and bought a 5G phone, they had put an array of antennas in there that can be turned on with a software update. So I'm going to stop radiating myself now and go back into airplane mode, but I want to tell you what just happened. So we were at about 1,300, right? We just went up to 1,910,000. And the science wants us to be not at 10,000, but 10 or less. And we wonder why people don't feel so great, right? So that's the bad news. Well, there's a little more because it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on our planet is sensitive to this because it overpowers us. Our disappearing species of pollinators, right? And 5G, so right now, third and fourth generation, that's what 3G and 4G are. It's like every 10 years is a new generation of technology. 3G and 4G, our signals and our data travel on these pretty long waves, right? There's a carrier wave, and then you've got the spiked microwaves. Those are pretty long, and that's how they can reach inside this building and get to your cell phone. All that's left to monetize of what's called the electromagnetic spectrum are these little tiny millimeter waves. And as Mr. Clegg said in his video, our government's already using those millimeter waves for crowd control because they know they can beamform it, aim it at you, it will burn your skin, and you will run away. So that's what 5G, that's what 5G is. It's fifth generation technology. And what the industry is spinning it up as is you can have smart cities, you can have super highways, you can have download speeds for your entertainment in just split seconds, right? Well, I don't know about you guys. I never woke up and said, I need to have a download in 2 seconds instead of 8 seconds, right? It's just marketing. 5G is a marketing term. And because they kind of own mainstream media, you know, just sit for an hour one day when you're watching TV and count up how many telecom ads you're getting and whatever ads that you're getting. That's who's controlling the information that we get. So thankfully there are many resources where you can get credible information, but this is just another revenue stream for them. So when I talked about the antennas in your devices, the cellular and data, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the locator, the hotspot, these are all added services that they have brought to us without really telling us that's what they're doing. So it's all on when we get our devices, and so we just use it with everything on. Now you know, you can go right into settings and turn off every single one and only turn on the one you need for the shortest amount of time that you need it. And as I was saying, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has what they call the ALARA principle, where the goal with radiation is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And they have 3 prongs to that. 1, spend as little amount of time getting radiated as you can. Makes sense once you know. 2, create as much distance as you can from a radiating source. And 3, if you can't get away from it, do your best to shield it. Right? So time, distance, and shielding. And those are the exact same principles that they should, and we've written to the CDC and we've tried, they should be applying those to this non-ionizing, man-made radio frequency microwave radiation. So we know how to do that. It's not rocket science. So the things that you have control over, in your home, you have a router. If you flip your router around, you'll see there are little Ethernet ports in it. Just run everything back through a cable like we used to do, right? Not only will you be safer once you turn off the antennas in your device than in your router, not only will you be safer, but your signal is just going to be so much better, far more reliable, much faster. Your data, your privacy, all of it makes so much sense when you plug it in. But we haven't been given the balance of information because otherwise we'd know. For your iPhone, for your Androids, Google phones, whatever you have, you can buy little adapters, like a $30 adapter. So when my daughter went down to the University of Delaware in sophomore year, got her own apartment, her phone had broken, and by then she had learned to buy the insurance program on it, right? So she contacts me, she says, Mom, they're sending me a replacement, but they're sending it to Ashland instead of school. When it gets there, will you forward it to me? And I said, here's a little opportunity for mommy blackmail, right? And so I said, I'll send it to you under one condition, that you hardwire your apartment. And my husband's over there going, you're mean. And I said, look, she was 19, she had a hunk of cancer cut out of her back already. Vulnerable subpopulations, children, fetuses, pregnant women, the elderly, because our cognitive abilities start to decline anyway, and we don't need help from radiation. And anybody with an existing health condition are especially vulnerable because your body's already fighting. And now we're layering on microwave radiation, and it can take down any of us. So I just got her a 50-foot Ethernet cable. Her router was in her living room. I gave her a roll of gaffer's tape, like, or masking tape, like they used to tape down wires on a movie set. And I said, send me a picture when you get it all hooked up, right? And she did me one better. She videotaped it. So she videotapes from her living room, down through the kitchen, down to the hallway, and into her bedroom. And I had also given her this little thing called a switch. So think of it as an extension box for electronics. So you can just plug in a bunch of stuff. And the beauty of this is, from the back of your router, you plug in one main cable into one hole, and then for all your devices, just get its own wire, and then each port has its own IP connection, its own IP address, so you're not competing for bandwidth inside your own home. You're getting it all quite nicely through a switch. So, and then of course we got her the adapter for her MacBook and for her iPhone. And so she sent me the whole picture that it's all hooked up, and then she went into her devices, found all the antennas, and turned them off. And then you just measure, because like I said, if we don't measure 5G and the Internet of Things, they literally want to put one or more antennas in just about every product you buy now. Did you know you can buy an iPotty? For when you're potty training your child, you can stick them right on their little iPotty and put a tablet right there so they can keep themselves occupied. And then they've come up with a little device you can put on a child's diaper, so when the child soils himself or herself, it'll send a message to your phone. Oh my good Lord, pick up the baby and do the sniff test like we all did. So we've kind of lost our minds a little bit with technology, but it's not our fault because we didn't know. There are definitely those who did know. T-Mobile's parent company in Germany commissioned a study back in the year 2000 that documented all the harm and recommended invoking the precautionary principle, which of course they have not done. So that brings us to situations like we have out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts right now. And in Pittsfield, Verizon put up a cell tower. They blew through a neighborhood. They went through police tape. They put up a cell tower. And the day that was turned on, a little girl came down and said, "Mommy, my head really hurts. I feel all buzzy inside." And the mom called, and that was the day that that Verizon cell tower got turned on. Courtney Gilardi's the mom. Both of her daughters got sick. They were vomiting in their beds. Their skin was doing all sorts of horrific things, the breathing. Neighbors whose cancers had been in remission came back. One of them is now dead. They've been fighting this for 3 years. And for the first time in the United States, their city council asked their Board of Health to investigate. And they spoke to the scientists, they spoke to the doctors who have given a diagnosis of electromagnetic illness. And who knew? The Americans with Disabilities Act has recognized this since 2002. So for the first time in the US, the Pittsfield Board of Health did their due diligence. They documented everything. They, of course, spoke to the industry as well. And the industry brings in this Dr. Eric Swanson from Pittsburgh, who gets up there and says all this stuff that when they fact-checked turned out not to be true at all. And then they said, well, who is this Dr. Eric Swanson? Well, he's a physicist who's never published one paper on microwave radiation. He specializes in quarks and stuff. So that's what the industry brings in to talk to our towns to convince us that this is safe and we should all be putting cell towers in our neighborhoods. Because that's what 5G or 5th generation is. There are only millimeter waves left to monetize. And in order for those to fly, they can't go very far, these little tiny waves, and they get disrupted by trees and by snow and by rain. It's really unreliable technology. But they're still moving forward, and their solution is to put a cell tower inside our neighborhoods every 2 to 12 houses. So their vast volumes of data can make the hop to your 5G devices. So now we have cell towers showing up at the curb, literally, as we saw in the video with Mr. Clegg, literally outside of people's homes, and they're getting sick. So in Pittsfield, and this wasn't even 5G, these were just the big macro towers. 6 of them got turned on for a structure that was approved for 48 of these big macro antennas. Only 6 turned on, and these people got so sick that they've had to abandon their homes, sleeping in cars, couch surfing, sleeping with friends, until their money runs out. Some moved back home and just stayed there being sick. So this is a little picture of where Verizon put that cell tower. They tend to take the path of least resistance. They got an application approved for this in a commercial district on almost a 60-acre parcel of land. The address for where that property was in the commercial district. That's what was permitted. What did they do? They drove 10 minutes around to the back side of this property, broke through this neighborhood, put it right on top of the neighborhood because it's easier for them to put electrical where it's already run. Right? It's easier for them if they don't have to go up a hill and create a road and clear the trees and do all that. So they tend to take the path of least resistance. So this is the cell tower. The science says you should be at least 500 meters from a cell tower. The epidemiological studies tell us what's actually happening in society. And when we look at those studies, there's a death curve and a neurological toxicity curve, and the curve starts coming down around 500 meters. It doesn't actually catch up to the normal population death statistics until double that, almost 3,000 feet. But look at this. This outer circle is the 1,500 or 500 meter mark, 1,500 feet. And all these houses are in that zone. So this is why Lori and others have worked so hard to try and educate our towns so that we can protect ourselves. Because, as I said, the industry comes in and says a lot of stuff that's not true, or it's not the whole truth. So they'll come in and say, gee guys, if anybody's concerned about any effects of this, well, gosh, you know, that Telecom Act of 1996 says if there's environmental harm, you can't sue us, right? That part's true, but what they don't tell you is, as one of the lead attorneys says, your hands are not tied. You may have one finger tied, but you've got 9 other fingers. And there are many things that every single one of our towns should make sure is in your local zoning code, because if it goes to court and your law doesn't say we only want these in commercial districts, or industrial is even better. If you don't have those protections written into your bylaws, the judge has nothing to go with and says, gee, they're right. You don't have that in your bylaws, so guess what? We have to let them build this thing here. So it behooves us all to learn about this, and we're so very grateful to Patty and Doug Wood at Grassroots Environmental Education. They have won an award from the EPA for other good environmental work, like getting pesticides off of the school grounds. And they have come up with a project called Americans for Responsible Technology. What the law says at the federal level is that within reason, you have to be able to make a phone call in an emergency, right? That has nothing to do with broadband. It has nothing to do with Wi-Fi or any of these added services like 5G that they want us to think we have to do. What they're doing is trying to expand their capacity because they keep selling more product. The only thing that they have to be able to do is, within reason, make a phone call. And unless they could give you records, unless you have it in your bylaws that we demand drop call records and we demand a drive-by test to show that there's a gap in service, If there's no gap in service in making a single phone call, you don't have to do anything the industry says, but you better make sure your local zoning bylaws has that in there. So Patty and Doug Wood have come up with a checklist of items to compare your local zoning code to, and I think Lori has already started with your town, so you can speak to her. But you gotta provide a judge with what they need to uphold the law. If you don't put it in your zoning, you're a sitting duck for industry, right? So there are scores of things you can put in your zoning bylaw, and when the industry comes, they're gonna go like, yeah, no, and they'll move on to another town. Not that we wanna put another town in this position, but protect yourselves. And our friends at Grassroots Environmental Education have a second project called Tech Safe Schools, and that's where my journey began, was with our schools. And so they have come up with some solutions for our town. So if you have kids, if you have nephews and nieces, if you have grandchildren, and if you reach out to Tech Safe Schools, you can say, here's all the folks in my town, the school administrators, the school committee members, maybe the school nurse. Here's a list of their names and addresses. Please send them that wonderful packet that you have, and then I'll go in and start talking to them about it. So everybody just wants to help you guys. We want to make our homes safe. We want to make our schools safe, and we want to make our communities safe. At the Fay School in Southborough, it's a very prestigious international boarding school, and it's where like Saudi princes send their sons to be educated, right? It feeds up into St. Mark's. And there was this little boy who kept getting the call home from the school nurse saying, you gotta come pick up your son, it's happening again, headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, can't concentrate, can't access his schoolwork. Mom and dad get out of work, they go pick him up, they take him to the doctors run their tests, they got nothing. They pay thousands out of pocket for specialists, they got nothing. Parents start doing their investigation and discover microwave sickness. And then they discover when he's away from school, school vacation, summer break, all of his symptoms resolved. Within a day or two of being back at the Fay School, the poor little guy, he was 10 at the time, got sicker and sicker. So that's when the parents started doing their research. They're like, there's something going on at the school because he's fine at home. And he was an otherwise happy, successful, social kid that was falling apart at school. So they figured this out. They went in and they measured the microwave radiation. So first they said to the school, we think it's the Wi-Fi. And what we've learned is that the Fay School has a wait list a mile long internationally. And they tend to be prone to disenrolling families that raise any kind of an issue the next school year. So they asked him, could we please, as our child rises up into 7th grade, could we please ask to have hardwired classrooms in the, half a dozen classrooms he's going to be needing? And they said no. So then they hooked him up with a dosimeter, which is what doctors will use when they use this technology to stimulate bone growth or stem cell growth or whatever treatments they're doing. They hooked him up with a medical device to measure his heart as he went throughout his day. And then they put a really high-end detection meter that could record the data. And at the end of the day, when they looked at the data, poor little dude's heart and the radiation spikes throughout the day were running in parallel. So they have empirical evidence now, and they take that to the Fay School, and they said, no, we're really not interested in helping you. So then the parents said, look, we are fortunate to be in a position, can we please pay to hardwire the 7 classrooms so our child can access his education? And again, they were turned down. And here in the United States, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it doesn't matter if you're in a private school or a public school, every child deserves to have reasonable access to their education. So they sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And although they didn't win the case because they didn't have enough facts in front of the judge to prove that it was actually the high-powered Wi-Fi in the schools that did this to the sun. For the first time in the United States, the court recognized that you don't have to have heat from a device to have harm. And that was with great thanks to testimony by Dr. Martha Herbert from the Autism Lab here, and Dr. David Carpenter from Albany, who's been a World Health Organization, advisor for years. So that's what we're learning, is these lawsuits kind of build off each other, and you get a win on this and then you build off it for the next one. So this was the readings that came off of that child. This little jiggity line down here is the amount of radiation in a typical coffee shop if you go in to access their Wi-Fi. That little jiggity thing, this is what was going on in the schools up top there. So this today is what all of our children are exposed to. And I gave a presentation, and we did a Generation Zapped screening up at another school, and a teacher came up to me afterwards and she said, I've been a teacher for 30 years. And she said, I can't believe the change in the children. And she said, you watch those kids queue up to go home at the end of the day. And she said, the little boys are already sitting there doing this like they have the controllers in their hand because they're getting ready to go home to feed their little addictions. Right? You talk to any teacher today, how many more boxes of tissues are they going through these days with the nosebleeds and the nausea? Talk to a school nurse. I was at a Metro West Women's Conference one day, and I had a booth. And this woman comes up to me and says, I'm a school committee member in one of the towns here. And as we got to talking and she started learning about all these microwave sickness symptoms, she just looks at me, she goes, you've just described, she says, I'm a school nurse as well, and you've just described my everyday now with the children and the adults in the building. So it's happening right under our noses, and it's so easy to fix if we can just make the mental shift to safe, superior technology, because Wi-Fi is crummy service. And as Frank Clegg said in his video, the solution for our towns is not more wireless infrastructure, because pretty much if you go and you look at Verizon or AT&T or any of their maps, they're boasting that they have full coverage everywhere. Legally, you only have to be able to make a phone call, not streaming, not surfing the web. And if we would just bring fiber optics or high-speed cable right to the building and then simply pick up with the Ethernet cables, problem solved. Once we start accessing it through a hardwired connection, that diminishes the capacity load where the towers can't keep up today because they've oversold the product. So we can fix it. We can fix any of it. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us when we finally do the right thing in our society, it comes through 3 channels. 1, the public learns and speaks up and says, we're not going to take this anymore, right? 2, it goes through the courts, and as Lori indicated, the FCC was sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of scientific evidence of harm, medical reports, citizen reports of harm, 11,000 pages. And so the judges in the Ninth Circuit Court in Washington, D.C. said to the attorneys for the FCC, so show us your homework. How did you determine that those 1996 exposure limits are still good when we have all this new electropollution? And the FCC did, oh, well, the FDA said it was okay. And so the court said, well, where's the homework from the FDA? And of course there is none, because not one of our federal agencies has ever done the full review of the peer-reviewed, non-industry funded science. Back in the 1990s, when the Telecom Act was passed, the EPA had been doing some good work on this and it got defunded. Same thing, CDC, FDA, all of them got defunded because of the missing piece of my puzzle. So when I was learning about this, I kept thinking, if this is as bad as little me is finding in the scientific literature, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? So I started figuring this out in 2013, 2014. In 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came up with this free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. So I read Captured Agency, and the graphic they chose for the front of their report is a revolving door. And we learn that Ajit Pai, who was our former FCC commissioner, was a senior attorney for Verizon. The one before him was Tom Wheeler. Back in the 90s, when the first broadcast was done on Larry King Live, I can't remember if it was the husband or the neuro-oncologist, Dr. David Perlmutter, got on Larry King Live and said, yeah, the wife died of these unusual brain tumors on the side of her head, not in the middle of the brain where it would normally show, on the side of her head, and it lines up with the antennas in her cell phone. Well, that became a PR nightmare overnight for the wireless industry, so they stepped up and said, oh, this is terrible, because remember, they did no pre-market safety testing. We have the money, let us partner with the government and we'll do the studies. So they hire this Dr. George Carlo. He puts 200 scientists in place, and for years, they do this studies. And Dr. Carlo comes back, and he reports to the head of the industry and says, yeah, that cell phone likely did kill that woman, and children are especially vulnerable. We should have invoked the precautionary principle, but they buried it. And they discredited Dr. Carlo. So this is Captured Agency. This was my missing puzzle piece, that there is no cavalry coming. There's no higher-ups that are going to come and fix this for us anytime soon, and the damage is happening rapidly, and this radiation is cumulative. The longer we leave our tissues exposed, the more it's absorbing, and the greater the likelihood that we're going to hit a tipping point. Okay? So Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, the public gets engaged, it goes through the courts. As Lori said, it was actually Friday the 13th of 2021 in August that the courts ruled to the FCC. They said, we're remanding this back to you because apparently the courts don't like to tell our agencies what to do outright. They said, you guys need to do better. You need to look at the science and account for vulnerabilities to people who are sick from this, to children, to long-term effects, because their testing that they did was on a mannequin with gel in its head based on a military guy in the 90th percentile of military fitness for 6 minutes and 30 minutes. There's no long-term studies that pertain to our public radiation exposure limits. And then what's it doing to the environment? It's been going on 2 years now, and the FCC has done nothing. So that's why we hope that as you guys come up to speed with this, you will apply common sense, look at the science for yourselves, don't take our words on anything, go look at it for yourself, and if it resonates, then do everything in your power to protect yourself, your loved ones, and our environment. So people get engaged. It goes through the courts, and there are lawsuits happening all over the place. You can go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technologies and look at the legal issues, and you'll find lawsuit after lawsuit all over the world going on. But we don't hear about it on TV or on the radio, right? The third piece is public policy. So, you know, my brain goes right towards solutions. That's why I went after a grant, and I got a meter put on loan in the Ashland Public Library. So anybody with an Ashland Library card can take it out. Now that almost every library has a library of things, maybe that's what you guys want to try and do in Upton too, get funding for that. Out in Pittsfield, they put one on loan. Out in Newton, a doctor and I went after a cultural council grant, you know, state level funding that trickles to each town. They funded one for the Newton Library. So that's something everybody can do. So we did that. And then I went to my senator and I said, Senator Spilka, she and I had worked together when I ran the Education Foundation. We brought a lot of this technology into our schools. I show Karen the science. I show her our little sign. So unbeknownst to me, we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign in our classrooms in Ashland. Best practices for mobile devices. Turn off the devices when you're not using them. Turn Wi-Fi on only when it's needed. Put a wall switch on or get a little squeezy thing to turn it off and on. Always place a mobile device on a solid surface because, as we read in the fine print, it's telling you not to keep it anywhere on your body. So we became the first in the nation, as it turns out, to do that. And I'm showing Senator Spilka the science, and she's looking at me, and I measured her cell phone and her district director's laptop. Both devices went way off the charts, and they're looking at me like, really? I said, yes, and nobody knows. Is there anything from where you sit where we could simply give people the right to know, just like we ultimately did with tobacco, alcohol, gambling, pornography? Adults will make their choices, but it's our moral obligation to at least present the facts, give them a right to choose, and most especially protect our children and our environment. So Karen put me with a lawyer in her office, and we came up with a very simple bill that would form a commission. I was told that's how things are done in Massachusetts. You form a commission, get the right minds at the state level to look at an issue, and then decide what to do. So we introduced that bill in 2015, and then people would say, oh, don't get your hopes up. A bill in Massachusetts never goes anywhere the first time it's introduced. Or they'd say if it came in under constituent request, good luck to you, because they've got thousands of bills to get through, and if it's not sponsored by a legislator, good luck to you. And I'm like, okay, but I've done everything I could think of. So I've had such privilege to connect with many of the world's leading scientists and doctors, and far too many people have become harmed. And I'm a technical and professional writer by trade, so I just wrote a little template and said, here, will you please send in a statement for this bill? And I sent that out, and lo and behold, we got a bunch of testimony in. And that first session, my bill came out of the Public Health Committee favorably, and then it went to healthcare financing and died. So we have had legislation in Massachusetts. We had a utility smart meter bill here, even before my bill. And you might ask, what is a smart meter? Well, when I was a little kid, I'm the youngest of 10 kids, and hide and seek could take a long time. So I'd be in the bushes, you know, ducking down low, and I'd just sit there and watch the little dials go around on the utility meters. Those were good old analog devices. They were just strictly mechanical things that measured our usage so they could send us a bill. And there were people who walked the neighborhood and took our readings down, and then we got a bill. Of late, the industry has been selling smart digital technology, and they've been replacing those meters that lasted for 40 or 50 years with digital meters that have a much higher turnover. And in order to collect our data, I know in my neighborhood there's a guy or a person who drives by in a truck, and he points a scanner at my, electric meter and gets a reading that I get a billing from. That saves the cost of having a walker go through the neighborhood. So, we're mindful of cost saves for our towns. But then National Grid came into Worcester to pilot their smart grid program, where there's nobody in your neighborhood. It all gets transmitted wirelessly. So the industry will tell you, oh, it just pulses that nuisance microwave radiation. A few seconds a day. Well, as I was preparing to testify with the Department of Public Utilities here in Massachusetts, I took my meter and I sat down in my dining room, right by the wall where we've got meters mounted on the outside. And I ran a 30-second test to see how many times it pulsed radiation. And mind you, I'm inside the house and I'm picking up the radiation. When I did the math for a 24-hour cycle, 17,000 times a day that was pulsing microwave radiation at anybody in the vicinity. So we need to be able to control what we can control, our own personal stuff. But those smart meters or digital meters, if it has an FCC ID number on it, go home and look. If it has an FCC ID number on it, that means that number's on there because it's transmitting radio frequency radiation. All right? We are at a critical point in Massachusetts. We've been working with Senator Michael Moore out in Worcester, who introduced a bill 4 sessions ago maybe, and before him it was Representative DiNatale. We've had a bill for 10 years in Massachusetts to give people simply the right to opt out of having this technology mounted on our homes without informed consent. National Grid offers an opt-out right now. They may charge you $70-ish to get a trusted analog meter back, and then they're going to bill you every month like $11 or so to get that reading, which is silly. During the pandemic, people were just sending in their readings on their computers, so we can do so much better. Senator Moore has added an emergency preamble to his bill this session. And before you leave, if you want to make sure we have your email address, when it comes time for these bills to come up for public hearing, they need to hear from the public. If we don't speak up, they're going to go where people are speaking up and put their time and energy on that. So we have the smart meter bill. Senator Julian Cyr out of the Cape and the Islands has a bill that would form a commission. We're still trying to do that. He has another bill to protect children from handheld devices. We have a bill that was in Representative Carolyn Dykman's district because she used to have the Faith School. And she's left. And so now Senator Mark out of the Berkshires, where Courtney Gilardi and her sick neighbors are, he has taken on the bill for the schools. And he has also introduced a new bill written by a country leading attorney on telecom that would give people with electromagnetic illnesses rights under disabilities. So we want people to be able to access society because people become shut-ins. Where can they go? They can't even go to the store. One woman wanted to take the dog to the vet and said, "Can I please be the last appointment of the day? And then you can just turn off the wireless while I bring my sick animal in." And they said, "Well, no, because we use the iPads for all of our exams." So that's kind of where we are. We have another bill, which is new this session. And right now, all of our towns, our boards of health, our health agents can tap into a system that already exists. How much food poisoning's been in our community? What are our COVID cases? We want electromagnetic illness, which already has an IDC code, an International Diagnostic Code. It already exists. We want that as part of the registry so that we can gather data, and with good data, we can make good decisions. So please sign up with us. If you're inclined, or if you want to think about it and come back, you can sign up through Massachusetts for Safe Technology. We have cards you can take. Any of this stuff, the little stacks, you're welcome to take. Feel free to use your phones to take pictures of any of the books that might interest you. Reset Your Child's Brain is by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, and she has a 4-week protocol for a digital detox because these kids are losing it and they don't know how to get themselves back under control. And I think anybody with children today has seen it in their own families or with their friends, the kids' friends. And we need to help these kids. So that 4-week protocol with Dr. Victoria Dunkley, the first week you just learn and you start telling everybody who crosses path with your child. And then the next 3 weeks there's no technology. And as terrifying as that sounds, because the digital addiction is very real. Not only the excessive screen time, but the actual microwaves are hitting the same receptors in the brains as drugs and alcohol and pornography and gambling. So we are literally addicting to this technology. And as scary as it sounds, because you watch someone try and take that tablet or phone away from a child, and if they lose it, it's a pretty good sign you got a big problem on your hand. But she teaches us how to parent again, set up positive things to do with your child, allow time for just imaginative play, downtime, And at the end of those 4 weeks, these families are so grateful to have their child back and to have their family dynamics back. So there are solutions for everything. And the most encouraging policy that we've had came out of New Hampshire. Before we go today, we're going to show you the trailer for an award-winning film called Generation Zapped, which actually is available through most of our public libraries in their Canopy or Hoopla subscriptions. It's also now on Amazon Prime. So when you leave here today and your head is spinning, what did that woman say? What do we need to know? Generation Zapped is a lovely way to sit down with your own loved ones and say, you wouldn't believe what I learned today. Want to watch a movie? Sit down and watch this. We did a screening up at River Valley Charter School up here in Massachusetts, and down from New Hampshire came this woman, Deb Hodgson. Like that little boy at the Fay School, her health crashed. All these wacky symptoms, seemingly unrelated. She went through the whole paying tons out of pocket. Doctors can't figure it out. She does her research, insists that they get rid of the wireless at home. And you know, the first thing, be warned, when you start this conversation with people, they're going to go, oh, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, right? So that's what most people get, even from their loved ones, when you open this conversation. And you know what helped Deb Hodgson's family? Her kids had given her a plant that was sitting in her kitchen doing nothing. When she turned off the wireless, within 2 months, that plant grew 15 inches. And the kids are going, wow, Mom, gee, maybe you're not crazy. So Deb comes down from New Hampshire, comes to our screening of Generation Zapped at this school where the art teacher had gotten sick from the wireless access points. Her principal was amazing, said, of course we'll turn that off. You don't even need it in your art classroom. And then we did a forum. Deb then invites me up to her town in Stratham, New Hampshire. We do another screening of Generation Zapped. She invites her legislators. They can't make it that night. And then bless that Representative Patrick Abrami. He comes knocking on her door, asking to be reelected. Deb invites him in, shares what she's been through. He's scratching his head going, this doesn't make sense. I'm an engineer. We know you have to have heat to have harm. But he was a good public servant. And he went and looked at the non-industry funded science, and he had this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing here? He started writing a bill. Deb introduced me to him. They jumped in his car from New Hampshire and drove down to my kitchen table in Ashland, and we spent the afternoon helping him to connect the dots. And then he went back and beefed up his bill and put in really pointed questions like, for starters, why does that legal fine print in our phones even exist? Right? Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and other world-leading insurance companies long since recognized that electromagnetic fields of radio frequency are a world-leading risk? And guess what? They put disclaimers in their policy. They don't cover for damages because they know how harmful this is. And then he goes on in his bill, why does the FCC only look at thermal effects? What about all these non-thermal effects? Why do they allow 100 times more radiation to the US than certain other countries like Russia and China? And it goes on. And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? If you're in a classroom, it's like a pebble in a pond. All this radiation just goes out, and from 20 or 30 devices around your children, and we wonder why they don't feel so good. So Frank Clegg actually flew in and testified with us at the New Hampshire State House. I was asked to come up, and Dr. Paul Heroux, who's one of the world's leading scientists, he's out of McGill University in Canada, which is like the Harvard of Canada, I guess. He used to work for industry decades ago until he figured out what was going on. Took a giant pay cut, and he's been teaching at the medical school in McGill. And he has created cancer in his lab using radio frequency. So we all testified alongside citizens up there, biologists, and lo and behold, we got the bill through the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee in the House. Then it went over to the Senate through Health and Human Services, and then it went under Governor Sununu's pen.
In 7 months, we got a bill passed into law in New Hampshire to investigate. And they did, even during the pandemic. They stuck to their deadline. And this is the end result. The first 17 pages summarize their findings. They document the conflicts of interest with our federal agencies and the wireless industry, and they make 15 recommendations to get our federal delegates on this, get the EPA back involved, and then locally transition our schools away from wireless, label everything that's radiating so we at least know we're in a danger zone. And it goes on and on. There's some really good recommendations. And train our medical communities. When I fell down the rabbit hole, that was one of the biggest gaps we had, is there were so many sick people who were getting misdiagnosed. And in worst case scenarios, you don't know how many times I've heard this one. Somebody's falling apart at home, they call 911, they tell them, I am electrically sensitive, I need to get some health care. They take them and they stick them in the psych ward. And they need medical, biological help, not psychiatric care. So we didn't have any way to train our doctors and our nurses and the first responders. And in 2019, Dr. Lynn Patrick pulled together world-leading experts and held the first medical conference for continuing medical education credits. Elizabeth Kelly did the second conference in 2021 during the pandemic. She had to completely pivot. We were supposed to be in Scottsdale, Arizona. With the pandemic, we had to learn how to do it on a platform. But the beauty of that is that entire conference training for 24.5 continuing medical education credits is now available for your doctors, for your nurses, for your town firefighters, because they need continuing education credits too. But how will they know if you and I don't tell them? So if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page, scroll down a little bit. You can sign up. I'm doing free public education webinars twice a month by Zoom, so come back and learn a little more every time. I also do a monthly strategy meeting, which Lori has been very faithful to come to, and we're so inspired to hear from all these other towns that are doing something, like Sheffield and Great Barrington, who also have a town warrant, like Millis, who has a town warrant article. But if you go down below our regular meetings, you'll find the EMF Medical Conference. So there's a letter to your healthcare practitioners that you can print out next time you go to the dentist, next time you go to the doctor, next time you go to your therapist or your physical therapist. Bring this little letter and say, hey, this conference is only available for those who enroll by the 15th of June and complete it by July 1. 24.5 continuing medical education credits. And I don't know about you, but if I start getting microwave sickness, I want to be in the care of somebody who actually understands what that is. And most of our doctors and nurses and first responders have no idea. So again, there's so much that we can do, right? Protect ourselves, protect our communities, protect our children and our environment. And it's not rocket science to fix. Hardwire. Talk to your towns about going fiber first, because wireless is no longer advanced technology. It's outlived its useful life. We want to make a cell phone call in emergency when we're out on the go, but coverage is pretty good these days. We don't need all their bells and whistles. We need safe spaces, starting in our homes, our schools, our public facilities, our parks, the grocery store. You know, we can do it, but nobody's coming to fix it for us. It's up to you and I. Okay, so I know it's a lot. At the medical conference, Dr. Patrick said, we know, it's like drinking water from a fire hose. But you guys have seen enough, I think, to recognize the big tobacco playbook when you see it. Did you know the World Health Organization actually identifies the big tobacco playbook? And the WHO has reopened their investigation. But if you just do a quick search with the World Health Organization, is this safe? You'll find old stuff. And as it turns out, there's two groups at the WHO. One is heavily industry funded, and the other is the actual scientists trying to get our world protected. How would you know? They reopened their investigation when the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute concluded through their animal studies that this is carcinogenic. but you'll be hard pressed to find it if you just do a search. But I can show it to you. So what I will do for everybody who leaves us with your email address, tomorrow I'll send you my slides, and that way you can just poke through them and you'll have links to everything that we've told you here today. So look at it for yourself and then decide what you can live with, to do or to not do. Okay, so. Questions? Yes.
I've seen pictures of what the 5G little boxes look like.
Mhm.
And we've had a lot of work done on our telephone poles around our area. And there's some boxes that look pretty suspicious. How do you find out where actually those little 5G antenna are? Because I've gone to the maps, and it's really hard to decipher.
It is. There's one website called antennasearch.com where you can put in any address and it'll show you where the big antennas are and the big cell towers. But you may need to go to the individual carriers, and they seem to be segmenting different parts of the state where Verizon will have one area and the others will have, AT&T or whoever. So you might be able to go to their individual maps, and if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and you look at the resources page, I have a link there to my personal research repository. I called it Understanding EMFs because I didn't understand EMFs, but I just tried to organize information, and it's just quick bullets you can look through, and you'll find some of the maps that you could go in and look at. But really, measuring is the only way to know. And Lori, she's a good sharer. I'm sure she'd be happy to do a walk around with you and show you what is what. So 5G is not just these millimeter waves. Remember, they can't get through stuff. So they have to be bundled up with the longer waves. So the first 5G radio frequency meters are just now being built. But if you have one that measures, like this is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter, it goes from 200 megahertz to 8 gigahertz. So that'll catch a lot of what is being wrapped up in 5G. And every company's doing it different, so it's just a marketing term, right? So this is still a good way to see if that thing is transmitting, because it won't just have the millimeter waves going. Okay.
How much do those cost?
This is just shy of $400. This is actually the one that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. And so doctors are purchasing this and putting it on loan to their patients. And there's a chiropractor up on the North Shore that went to the conference, and she bought one. And she said, what I do is I do my best to help my patients be healthy, but if they're walking home and going into an EMF environment, nothing's going to hold that I'm doing. So she says, I loan it to them for $10, and I say, you've got 2 hours. Go home, find out where all your exposures are, come back, and we'll talk you through what to do with it. So again, solutions at every turn. There are other meters that are about half this price that I know a number of people with electromagnetic illnesses that they like. And we can, if you reach out, I can show you a good website. Jeremy Johnson of EMF Analysis. He's a Silicon Valley engineer, and he and his wife, who's a medical doctor, got really sick suddenly, and they couldn't figure out what it was. Well, they had put a bank of smart meters on his condo, and they both got really sick. So he's now dedicated his life to consulting with people and helping them figure it out. And he's got a list of recommendations on his website, too. Okay. Yes?
Can I ask a question about the Pittsfield Tower?
Mm-hmm.
So that graph you showed me with the distance, was that measuring all of the antennas radiating at max power, or just one?
I think the Pittsfield cell tower has 6 antennas radiating. That graph I showed you with the circles shows the distances, and that science recommends 500 meters or 1,640 feet.
So that's 6 at full power.
Mm-hmm. And they're licensed for 48. Right?
I'm from Millis.
I was going to say, I drove down to Rhode Island with you in 2015 to the disabilities. Did you
No.
work on big tobacco?
No, well, yeah, well, probably before you were born.
Yeah, but you were the one who told me that we need to focus on the children, because that ultimately is what big tobacco got taken down by. was the impacts on children
Yeah.
secondhand. I thought I
So
recognized you.
we're doing one for our town meeting too. I wish
Yes.
we had worded it like yours
Yeah.
instead of the way we did. But I started thinking about cell towers in general, and we have a cell tower that is owned by Clear Channel, which is the biggest cell tower home in the country. And Dish just put up antennas on the top of that are 5G. And I actually went and got the report about the whole tower, and I started thinking about it. First of all, so in terms of not small cells, that are on the big 5G
macro.
antenna, the macro antennas. First of all, the two sets of antennas each weigh 1.5 tons. So I was every time now I drive by our monopole with those two, now 3-ton antennas at the very top. I think about how this evolved, that is anybody even really looking at the structural integrity of monopoles and how much weight they can hold, not how much radiation.
Yeah.
And
So,
that will be on us.
yeah,
Because all of us, if anything ever happens and we get sued,
right.
it'll be us as zoning boards, planning boards, it'll be the citizens. that will
I
have to
would
pay.
love to share what just happened in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire does this amazing report saying we should have setbacks, we should have all this other stuff. And New Hampshire is live free or die. Their towns really don't like being told what to do. So we thought, well, let's look at what's already in the state law and how can we empower the local municipalities to know there's a problem and to be able to protect themselves. And God bless Scott McCullough, who's the attorney who gave the oral arguments in the lawsuit at the FCC. I reached out to Scott and said, hey, what you doing? Right? He was up to his eyeballs doing a million things, but he took the time to look at the New Hampshire, what's on the books in their law today, and then write a revision to the law. And one of the elements that he put in was something called the ANSI-APCO site hardening standards. Those came out in 2019. I had no idea what that whole mouthful of anything meant, so I rolled up my little sleeves and went, what is this? Site hardening means if there's a man-made disaster or a natural disaster, you want to make sure that your communication facilities are going to stand hard against that, right? So they have a whole list of things that every cell tower, whether it's a monopole, which means just a pole with an antenna on top, or a tower, or sticking something up on a building, that there are now regulations for the nation to make sure these are done. The industry does not like these. They finagled their way in New Hampshire on the current bill that we were working on, and they stripped out the ANSI-APCO site hardening
And that's in
language.
2019.
2019.
Well,
Yeah.
what got me thinking about this whole thing is the day I finally sat down and read what they had given me, when I finally got to it, was the day, I don't know if you all remember, that we went from minus 20 degrees in the morning to 6 degrees at night. And one of the standards they apply for monopole towers is no greater than a 50-degree temperature difference in 24 hours. I thought,
Yeah, and those
that needs to be
ANSI,
rewritten.
yeah, those ANSI-APCO things have special regulations for different parts of the country where tornadoes or blizzards or whatever, fires,
I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, all of our zoning codes should have not only building code requirements to be met, they should have fire code requirements to be met, electrical code requirements. They should also have these site hardening requirements. So much we can do for our towns. They just have only heard from industry. And by the way, the industry says, well, if you don't approve this, we are going to sue you. And so all of our poor volunteer citizens go, we don't want to be sued. But guess what? Now the citizens are suing the towns. So we've got to get it right. They're going to get sued one way or the other if they leave their citizens vulnerable to close range microwave radiation.
Can you talk about the position that the Massachusetts Board of Health took in Pittsfield?
Yes. So, when the Pittsfield Board of Health filed with Verizon their emergency order that said, 7 days, please come to the table and let's sort this out, because another member of the community had said, I have a commercial property. I don't care if you move that cell tower over here. It's not going to hurt anybody here at night. They won't do it. They didn't come to the table. Instead, at 5 o'clock on that last day, they went to the courts and said, we don't think Pittsfield is empowered to do this emergency order to cease and desist with our cell tower. Mind you, their city council told their Board of Health to investigate. The Board of Health does its job. They confer with state level legal authorities, and they say, we are ultimately responsible for the health and safety of our residents and our environment, not the FCC. We are. And their city council and their mayor, who's all about 5G and putting their mark on the map, some of their city councilors are really good, but they refuse to give their own Board of Health the money to take this to court. So that's when the...
Pittsburgh or Pittsfield?
Pittsfield. So that's when the citizens said, well, we are suing the town because we want to go home. It's been 3 years that these families have not been able to live safely in their homes. So they are suing the whole town of Pittsfield and naming those boards and naming Mayor Tyre. And so the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards wrote an amicus brief, and that's a term I never knew I needed to know. That's a friend of the court filing saying, here's what we think and why you should support the citizens of Pittsfield and get rid of that cell tower. So to have a state level Board of Health association come out in favor of science is awesome. So we invite you all to a prayer circle next week, Monday. We're going to do a Zoom prayer circle for our friends in Pittsfield and just try and lift them up. It was supposed to have a hearing last
February
month.
14th.
Yeah, on Valentine's Day. And I think when that amicus brief came in, or maybe the judge got a flat tire, I don't know. But they postponed, and it's going to be on the 6th of April. And so we may know. And then we'll see what the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards does from there. They already have a set of legal guidelines for all of our towns, boards of health, and they've already added 4 pages about cell towers to that legal guidance document. So we're making inroads. I worked with Dr. Lisa Naj, who's an environmental health practitioner out on Martha's Vineyard. For 2 years, we worked with the Massachusetts Medical Society. And they put out a statement based on one California had done in 2014 saying, the right people need to be looking at this, and if there's a problem here, we need to get public policy in line with the science. It wasn't a terribly bold statement, but I understand the Mass Medical Society is very prestigious across the country, so for them to have said anything is another good stepping stone for the next ones. Right. So we're trying, you guys, but we can't do it on our own. Don't be one voice. That was my hard lesson learned. Easily swept under the rug. But when 10 or 20 of you come to the local meetings, and Lori will tell you when they are, or you guys may already know, then it gives our towns the courage to say, we're here to help you. Show us what you need, give us the facts, but you can't do it alone. Yes.
What is your recommendation for getting more parents? Because I'm looking around, you know, like where are my peers?
Yes.
And I don't know how to inspire them to get here. Because many of them, I think, when I start talking about this, it's like,
Yeah.
because they don't know how to unwire their lives.
Right. So the question is, how do we get other parents engaged on this? And a few suggestions is, one, acknowledge that we're all dependent on our devices and we're not trying to take anybody's anything away. We just want to have enough information to make choices for safety. And so the 2 things that I have found are most effective is, one, say you're not going to believe this, but pull your iPhone out. go into settings, general, about, legal, and show them the RF exposure disclaimer that's been in there all along.
How do us Android users do that? I tried to do it. You have to go to a website and I just couldn't, it was useless.
Email me and I'll find somebody who has an Android and we'll find it.
Yeah.
Because I think
did
what
try
you need to
it.
do is just, if you just put in the make and model of your
I
phone
did.
and then put RF exposure, it'll tell you what that disclaimer says. I just don't know which path to follow on that one. But the second thing is to show them, right? Having a meter in hand is the only way to make the invisible visible. So, and you know, like we've got one in a community place in our public library, you know, and every time you buy an appliance now, you want to make sure it's not going to radiate you. My husband, oh, he found a really good floor model for a new stove, oven, range thing. And it gets delivered, and it's called a smart stove for those people who want to turn on their stove when they're not home.
That doesn't sound smart.
Not so
I
smart.
know, we've lost our minds, but if somebody wants to do that, you could. My girlfriend built a new house in Plymouth, and when she got all her appliances, her stove was radiating, but I could go into the settings, and we found out how to turn off the antennas. So I went looking in my new stove, and there was no setting. And so I pulled out the manual, and I find the RF exposure disclaimer in there, and you know what that one said? It said, stay 20 centimeters back.
With a long spatula.
Right. I'm like, so the only thing I want to cook in my kitchen is food, not myself, right?
Yeah.
So I call up the help desk, and they send a technician out. And he wasn't very happy to know what I knew. And he's like, I'm just here to do my job. But I'm saying, look, this stove on this meter is measuring 1,000,090, and we want it to be under 10. And he had his phone there, and I said, do you want me to measure your phone for you? He says, no, I'm going to go wait out in my car. So we went back out to his van or whatever. And then the engineers call him and tell him, all he had to do was pull off the back panel, and behind the digital display, there was another little tiny board with a wire to the main board. He just unplugged it, and then he put the panel back on, and I measured, and I was back under 10 in my home. So with 5G and the Internet of Things, welcome to our world. That's what they're selling us. So everything you buy, you want to make sure you have control. Like when Steve bought a new television, the poor guy had to be married to me, right? So we have an armoire that the old TV fit in just right. So he did all his research and found one that fit, and we went down to the store and we buy it, and I come home and I see the box and it's got the Wi-Fi logo on it. I said, oh honey, can we disable that? And on that unit we couldn't. So poor guy was behind that thing hooking everything up, and he puts it back in the box. We go to the store, I bring my meter, and all we had to do was get a unit that had Ethernet ports in the back, and through the controls we could go in and turn off the antennas and then measure to make sure we got them all, because most things have more than one. You know, even your wearables, if you go out to the Fitbit site, you see like these strapping elite athletes saying, my heart was doing really funny things, and then my Fitbit broke. And I didn't get another one for 2 weeks, and my heart was doing great. And then I put that new Fitbit on, and guess what? My heart started going jiggity again. So we just need to learn, choose airplane mode, create a sleep sanctuary, little by little, see where your exposures are and hardwire. And then the things you can't fix directly, we got to speak up about to our legislators, to our towns, and make it safe. Because we love technology, but it should be hardwired with wireless as a distant second, and for only the antenna, the one antenna we need at the time, not all of them, and then put it right back in airplane mode.
And is it even possible if we could do this whole thing through cable, which we even already have in town, and we don't need any of those small cell antennas?
Yeah, because you can get phone, internet, and cable right through your cable service, right? Fiber optics is more future-proof.
Yeah.
It's faster, and as technology evolves, you can just add more fiber optic conduit into the, you know, the housing that's being run to your property. So that's ultimately, I think, where we're going. Yes.
I'll try to be quick. So all of this infrastructure bill that just got passed, people seem really excited. Congress people, Biden, everybody has to have Wi-Fi.
Broadband. Yeah.
So, so because it's coming out, I mean, everyone who didn't get it before is now going to get it. You know, everybody in the country has to get it. So how can you use the infrastructure money to do it wisely, or is it?
Hopefully, if the industry doesn't get in there and say you have to allow 5G, so we got to be careful of the Trojan horse. If they put the fiber optics down your main roads and they don't bring it right to your premises, they're going to start putting those small cell nodes right off of the fiber optics for that final connection, and then you're going to get fried.
But the plan is to just roll out 5G, right? And the money's behind. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's just there's this big thing rolling
Cha-ching,
out
cha-ching,
right now.
cha-ching, cha-ching. It is, and that's why we need to get active on this. We need to educate. Actually, to your point, the town meeting warrant article in Millis does something that Pittsfield did. So Pittsfield City Council wrote a series of letters to go to their state delegation, their federal delegation of legislators, to the Massachusetts Mayors Association, the Massachusetts Municipal Association, saying, we need to know the facts here so we can tell our towns and we can protect our towns. So that's what the
Right, but what
initiative
we
is.
didn't do is ask for a moratorium until.
Yeah, well,
in case
we don't
it's
want to
a
use the
pause,
word
a
moratorium. We
A
want to put a
pause.
pause on it, because moratorium legally could get you into some hot water. But put a pause until the FCC does their court-ordered mandate to investigate the science and come up with real safety measures. So many towns have town meeting again in the fall. So and we're piloting all this right now. God bless Patricia Burke. She's the one who got the ball rolling on all of this. And it was Patricia Burke, Peggy Patton, you and I, who got in a car and drove down to Rhode Island in 2015. I was so
That's me.
inspired by you.
It wasn't me. It was my doppelganger. Another ball.
Yes.
So I'm sitting at town meeting, I'm ready to stand up and say why this is all good. In 3 sentences, how do I turn people around?
I love that question. So in Sheffield and Great Barrington, Massachusetts, they have a warrant article that pretty much says the same thing, right? And they just did a forum this past week on the 16th, and they have a set of statements prepared that if you want to sign up to take one of those statements. So we'll make sure we have that at the second forum we're going to do for your town at the end of
Right.
next month.
Okay.
And then everybody can sign up, and they've thought it out, what are the salient points. So thank you for offering. All right.
I think the other thing though, on your
Yes.
website, because I was on a board, so I was thinking like that. The videos that you have of the 4 speakers, the last 2 speakers, the gentleman from Canada and the lawyer, is something that I've got to try to figure out a way to get elected officials to look at.
Good.
Because I think that would resonate extremely well
Yeah.
with them.
When I was sitting,
Lawyers conference from just last week?
No, their website has a conference.
from Lennox maybe?
No, it's 4 speakers. It's the gentleman.
Oh, it was the National Institutes of Health one? Was that the Health and Buildings
It's on your
Roundtable
website
Conference?
right up
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, and our talks were limited to 10 minutes
It is short.
at the NIH. So I did the opening remarks, and then we had Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada. We had Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the world's leading scientists. And then we had Theodora Scarato from Environmental Health Trust and Peter Sullivan. Now, the reason we invited Peter in, when I first was learning about this, I came across a video that Peter had done online somewhere in the autism community, and I think he was talking to philanthropists, saying that, you know, this is a good cause for us to be funding to help. Peter had been a fighter pilot, kind of Top Gun. He was up there, you know, the further away from the Earth you get, the stronger the natural electromagnetic fields are. So he's up there with like the gamma rays and stuff. In a plane that's equipped equipped with radar inside the plane with all the instrumentation. And ultimately, Peter wound up getting very ill. Dropped weight, his teeth were getting brittle and breaking off. And then when his 2 little boys came into the preschool years, both of them presented on the autism spectrum. And when I listened to Peter's talk, he said that his boys are young men now and neither one is on the autism spectrum anymore. And I went, I didn't even know that was a possibility. But there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom, it didn't come from dad, it came from somewhere in the environment. And for many families with autism, there are huge gains to be made with just simply getting rid of the wireless, but also addressing the dirty electricity from the wires in the walls. That can be another really big one, and smart meters throw a lot of that on the house sometimes too. So that is...
This was a lawyer though, I think if you want to get your elected officials,
Yeah.
what they need to hear.
Yeah, there was a really good forum last week.
And that lawyer.
Okay, it's probably Andrew Campanelli or
Yes.
Scott McCullough. They did
Those two.
programs out in Lenox. We've got all sorts of materials. So yeah, reach out. And again, as I said, if you leave us your email address, I'll send you my slides and you can just boom, 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 go right through and grab whatever you think is going to be helpful. Okay.
Anybody who wants to sign the email
Right.
address?
Any other questions? We're going to close with the trailer for Generation Zap, just so you know what it is, and it gives you a next place or maybe a next step to try and let this all sink in a little bit more.
We might try and do a showing sometime in town
Yeah.
before town meeting if we can figure out how and where to do it.
Yeah. And Dom, to your question too, this is a great thing to have 15, 20 people in your home. Sit on the floor in your living room on your couches and watch this together. And I can be brought in to bring people up to speed with everything that's going on since this was released in 2018.
And this is just a 2-minute trailer, just so you can get a little tiny bit of a sense.
If I ask you how much more radiation does penetrate your body today compared to like 10 years ago, is it twice as much, 3 times as much? No, it's a quintillion times more. That's a 1 with 18 zeros.
In France, they had some of the first adopters of Wi-Fi. Now they're recognizing that the Wi-Fi is potentially harmful to school children, so they're getting rid of it in elementary schools.
Could where you carry your cell phone make you sick? Radio frequency emissions from the school's strong wireless network has triggered headaches, nosebleeds, and nausea.
Smart meters are replacing the analog meters on your home.
Some say such meters are making them sick.
Nobody has taken into account the cumulative radiation that we are all getting, especially children.
Had there been free market testing, cell phones never would have made it into the marketplace.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
Radio frequency radiation are in fact cancer-causing and are perhaps cause of neurological diseases and cognitive problems and developmental problems in children.
The wireless industry spends $100 million a year lobbying the Congress. So it's really hard to go up against the power of this industry, even when you have the facts on your side.
We urgently need more research. We have almost no U.S.-funded research in this area.
Scientists decided it was time to counter the industry claims that there is no evidence.
Good evening. The World Health Organization today said cell phones are possibly carcinogenic.
It puts it in the company of several other kinds of things like lead, as well as engine exhaust and chloroform.
These are all things that immediately will reduce your exposure. Use a wired earpiece. Concentrate on speakerphone.
A wired computer classroom will not expose your child to radio frequency radiation.
I do have a certain sense of optimism that eventually the right thing will happen, like it did with tobacco, like it did with asbestos.
Thank you. If
Yeah,
anything that
thank
I've
you.
learned in the last 10 years that can help you connect the dots to get to the solutions quicker, that's what I hope for. So reach out, even with silly little questions. I specialize in those. There's a woman in Hopkinton who I met at our farmers market in Ashland, and we got to talking about this. And I've known her now for a few years. She comes
to our free public education webinars. She learns a little bit more, and then she goes home and she does a little bit more, and she's just building it. She got herself a meter. Now both of her skeptical brothers have come to learn with us, and now they're both hot on this issue. So start where you are, be gentle with yourselves, go home and scream into a pillow, and then come back and let's see what we can do.
And can we say turn off our Wi-Fi at night at least?
Yeah, create a sleep sanctuary. Turn it all off at night. Put your phones in airplane mode. You can still use the alarm, the clocks, anything you've downloaded is there to enjoy, but without radiating yourself.